Sup nerds, it's Lindsay. Sorry I didn't make a video yesterday. I wasn't really feeling all that well, so I didn't do much of anything yesterday. I'm feeling a lot better today though, thankfully. So I'm going to do something I haven't done on this channel before, which is talk about movies. I actually really like movies, so I'm pretty excited to do this, and I'd be very happy to keep it up if it goes over well. I do want to start by saying that I am in no way a movie expert or a movie guru or a movie buff or whatever the pretentious thing to call it is. I'm not a movie expert in any way. I'm just someone who likes movies and watches a lot of them. In regards to movies I like, I'm gonna go ahead and quote this guy I went to pre-med with, actually. He used to say this about wine. He used to say that there's two different kinds of wine. There's wine that I like and there's wine that I don't like. And I'd like to apply that to movies because that's kind of how I feel about movies. When it comes to movies, there's movies that I like and there's movies that I don't like. And there's not really any kind of rhyme or reason to it. Not really a reason why I like certain movies and dislike certain movies. They're just how it is. But one thing I will say, and I'm stealing this from Adam over at Your Movie Sucks. If you guys haven't heard of him, you should go check him out. He's a pretty popular guy on YouTube, though, I think. I'll go ahead and link his channel down below in case you haven't heard of him. But he said this thing on his channel once, and what he said is that he doesn't like movies that get worse the more you think about them. And I really agree with that. I don't like movies that get worse the more you think about them. I like movies that get better when you watch them again, or like when you watch them for the second time, third time, fourth time, 100th time. I like movies that get better when you think about them, when you discuss them with more people. That's the kind of movies that I like. So with that being said, I'm now going to completely contradict myself and say that my absolute favorite kind of movies are horror movies. Those really are my absolute favorite kind of movies. I'm a huge Scream queen. And of course that sounds really hypocritical because horror is notorious for being kind of needlessly convoluted, for being gratuitous at times, sometimes being even like patronizing to its audience, sometimes even downright insulting to your audience's intelligence. What else? Incomprehensible. What else do people say about horror movies? Probably most famously just riddled with plot holes. That's another thing people say about horror movies. Particularly when it comes to horror franchises. And of course the Saw movies are of no exception. In fact, they're the worst offender on a lot of those points, but I did a marathon of these movies on Valentine's Day because I had nothing else to do. Also because Valentine's Day is honestly my favorite holiday, and so I wanted to do something I enjoy, did a little treat for myself, so thought it'd be fun to just kind of walk through them all and talk about how I feel about all of them after seeing them all together. If that's not something you've done, if you like these movies or like any of them, but you haven't actually sat and watched all of them through together, I would highly recommend doing it. I think it was a very enjoyable experience. I'm pretty sure I had previously seen all of the 8 movies individually at some point before, but I think, wait, had I? To be perfectly honest, I'm not really sure. They all kind of blend together after a certain point. I know for sure I had seen the first one, and then 6, 7, and Jigsaw. I know I had definitely seen those before. The other ones, I'll have to rely on my kind of really hazy memory from the mid to late 2000s. My high school years got a little wild, y'all, but I suppose everyone's did, though. Also, I'm going to do this review of sorts with the assumption that y'all have seen these movies and you know about them. I'm not going to like go in depth into a synopsis and all the plot points of them. I'll just kind of briefly touch on what happened in each one, just in case, you know, I mean, like I said, they all kind of blend together. So I'll briefly touch on what happened in each one, especially since for a while they were literally coming out every single year on Halloween. So I'll just briefly say what happened, just not go into detail. Alright, I got my notes right here. Let's get into it. Okay, so starting with the first one. The OG. 2 guys, 1 bathroom, 2 hacksaws, 1 fake corpse, 2 tapes, 1 gun, an immeasurable amount of brown shit stains on the walls and ceiling and floor and everywhere. Now, I have to admit that when I first saw this movie when it came out, I did not like it. At the time, I really hadn't developed a taste for horror. I mean, I think I was about 13 when this movie came out. Did it come out 2004? Yeah, I was like 13. So I didn't really like it that much at the time, but damn do I appreciate this movie as an adult. Let me just say. I think the way it was mistakenly perceived when it came out, what a lot of people said was that it was just gratuitous, that it was just so overly violent and gory, and that it was torture porn. But when you really watch this movie, it is not any more violent or gory than any other horror film at the time. I mean, if you really look at other horror movies that came out in the early to mid 2000s, it's not any worse than any of the others. And really, it was just a gritty, low budget horror flick that had a lot of heart behind it. You can really tell just how much James Wan and Lee Wanell and everyone else put into this film. You can really tell how much heart went into it. You have to give credit where credit is due. Like, this film really kept its jump scares to a minimum, which is really impressive at a time when, like in the mid 2000s, when like people were so reliant on jump scares. So I think you really have to give them credit for that. Honestly, when I watch it now as an adult, my only grievance that I had, well, I had a couple. My first big grievance, of course, is those appalling scene transitions. Like, I'm sorry, but there's just no excuse for that. And then the other real big grievance I have with this movie is the whole relationship dynamic between Dr. Gordon and his wife. I don't know if anybody remembers because it's incredibly forgettable, but basically it just boils down to this. Wife is upset because man worked too much and doesn't pay attention to her. Wah! Like that's literally the whole thing. I mean, it's boring, it's tired, it's sexist, and it's a super cheap cop-out from actually establishing any kind of tension between two married people. It's time to put that trope to rest permanently. Okay, I'm done with that. Moving on to Saw 2, I think so that's the one with the detective father and then the son, and then there's 8 people trapped in the house and they're all poisoned and trying to find the antidotes if you don't remember it, which I don't blame you for not remembering it. It was pretty damn forgettable. Now, I think most people agree that this franchise took a really steep downward turn with this movie and stayed down in that trench for a while. For the most part, people usually think 2 through 5 were the worst of the franchise, and I have to agree with that. As far as the worst of the bunch, for me, I'd have to say I like 3 the least, but that's probably my least favorite in the franchise, but 2 was pretty crummy as well. I can see what they were trying to do with Saw 2. They were basically just trying to do Saw 1, but more. They make it bigger and ideally better. Instead of 2 people, have 8. Instead of having them trapped in one little room, have them trapped in a whole house. So there's just like more of everything from that first movie. More of that tension that comes from strangers waking up in a trap together, more of the relationship dynamics that emerge, more of the actual traps themselves. Even everything with the cops was expanded. We get to know more of the cops and more of their dynamic. I get what they were trying to do. They were trying to give fans of the first movie more of what they liked in the first movie, but of course there were some major problems with this. First of all, I think, in my personal opinion, I think this is the main reason this setup didn't work. By having them trapped in this huge house rather than in a room, it really lost that element of claustrophobia that I think was a huge part of what made the first movie so great. Because it really contributed to the panic that was felt from the very beginning, that whole thing, like, where you were so much panic, to have them in this really small, windowless room, and even within that room, have them be chained up so they can only move in that little small space. I think that is a huge element of Saw 1 that was just lost in Saw 2, and it really suffered from it. Also, we gotta talk about the characters, or really lack of characters. There were 8 people in this trap, and I cannot name a single damn one of them except for Amanda, and that's just because of her connection to the rest of the franchise. Not only can I not name them, I can't even remember anything about them, with the exception of Amanda and then that one, like, huge dude who was, like, the roid rage guy. They were basically just, like, those, like, paper dolls that you make in kindergarten, you know, like those, like, strings of paper dolls, except I could never do it. I couldn't make a chain. I could never cut them right, but that's beside the point. The point is they were cardboard characters. That's the real point I'm trying to make. As far as the twist at the end of this movie, they ended up kind of just recycling the same twist later for Jigsaw, and I think they did it better the second time around. Now, here's, here in my notes, I wrote down, here's what I think could have made it better. If they'd increased the number of people in the main trap, but then still had them in a very small room like before, then I think this could have turned into just a claustrophobic nightmare, and it could have been really good. There's really not a lot else to say about Saw 2. I don't have anything else here other than just that it was just a disappointing movie. In fact, I'll go ahead and steal another line from Adam over at Your Movie Sucks. He did a full, in-depth review of all the Saw films, including Jigsaw, which I would highly suggest you watch if you want to know more about the technical aspects of these films, and about film in general, because he's a person that's very knowledgeable about film, so he can give you a review sort of from the eyes of that kind of a person. So I'll link that down below as well. But I remember in the review he said something to the tune of, the problem with Saw 2 was that it was significantly worse than Saw 1, but not quite bad enough that it was funny yet, and I really think that is the problem with it. I think that was kind of the problem with Saw 3 and 4 as well. Like, they were definitely starting to lean into the campiness there, but it didn't quite hit that stride until about 6, I would say. Getting into 3 and 4, those were the two that it turned out were actually taking place concurrently. Specifically, 3 is the one where Jigsaw and Amanda kidnap a doctor and force her to perform surgery on him while her husband goes through the traps to get to her. And then 4 is the one with the cop going through all the traps to rescue the other detectives. Really, those movies are just interchangeable, though. Saw 3, like I said, by far my least favorite. 3 and 4 had a lot of the same issues. They were recycling old concepts. They didn't really have a direction. They were going around in circles. I just hit my camera. They were going around in circles. Even the traps in 3 and 4 were kind of like uninspired. They were really like, especially in Saw 3, I feel like the traps were going for more of like a squeamish sort of like gross out element rather than an element of pure terror like they were in like the first couple movies. I'm especially talking about the pig one. I think you could tell what I was talking about. Like that pig one, whose idea was that? I'm honestly asking. That's not a rhetorical question. If anybody watching this knows whose idea that was, please let me know so I can find them and throw up in their face. Like that trap was just horrifying. It not in a good way either. It was just, I hate that trap. Anyway, besides all that, I think the real issue with Saw 3 for me is that, in my opinion, this is by far the least likable person that has ever been in a main trap in Saw 3. Even in Saw 2, when the characters were basically just like popsicle sticks with faces drawn on them, I still cared about them and like what happened to them more than I cared about this dude who was apparently named Jeff. Okay. He was just so infuriating to watch go through this maze. Okay, and the most infuriating thing is just how easily he could have saved every single fucking person in the trap. In later movies, like in like 6 and everything, they at least made the person have to choose between saving one person or another, or like made it some sort of a really difficult task to save someone. But I guess with Jeff, it would have been the easiest fucking thing in the world for him to have just saved everyone, but he just decided he'd rather be a piece of shit instead. And then the twist at the end of the movie, with him being the husband of the doctor who was performing the surgery, I mean, I guess it was decently executed. I didn't see it coming, but also I just didn't really care. So I don't know if that was a very good twist. That's really all I have to say for 3. I don't have any more notes for it. Let's move on to 4. 4, I do have a lot to say about. The problem with Saw 4, in my opinion, is they just try to do too many things with it. It reminds me of this play I was in back in my freshman year of college. I was in a production of Julius Caesar, the Shakespeare play, but the director gender swapped all the roles. So all the male characters were all played by women and the female characters were all played by men. And then also set it in an undefined, distant year in the future. And then also tried to modernize the soliloquy aspect by having the actors deliver part of their lines like a normal theater performance and then whisper part of their lines to a camera on stage that was live screening on a projector next to the stage. And then also a lot of it was set to 90s music with interpretive dance. Yeah, I wish I was kidding. Yeah, honestly, I wish I was kidding. I wish I was making this up. Buffalo State College, spring of 2010. There's probably a record of it somewhere. Go find it, laugh at it, have fun. But what I realized afterwards was that the real problem, I mean, it seems like there were many problems, but really the core of the problem was that the director just tried to do too many things. He tried to cram too much carne asada into the taco and the shell broke, inevitably. I mean, any one of those ideas, if he had just focused on it, like really focused on it, picked one idea and really focused on it, I think it could have ended up a respectable college show. But no, he just had to bring to life every weird NyQuil-induced dream he's ever had after reading a Shakespeare play. Okay, anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, Saw 4. Okay, so I think that the same sort of thing happened with Saw 4, what I was just talking about with that play. I think the same thing happened with Saw 4. They just tried to do too many things in one movie. Because first of all, they had to introduce a new villain because Jigsaw was now dead, so they had to give us some background on a person who was essentially a rando at that point. I mean, he briefly popped his head up in Saw 3, but that's it. And then they had to also establish some new protagonists. Once again, fucking randos. It's really difficult to get us to care about new people in such a short period of time. And then they also tried to do that fucking time fuck with having it take place concurrently with Saw 3. And then they also really tried to, like, turn the genre on its own butthole by, like, having the entire concept get reversed where, like, in all previous movies, it was a race against the clock. Like, could they get it done in time? And then in this one, they completely flipped it around and made the twist that all he had to do was not try to complete the task. Like, if he just done nothing, everyone would have been fine. Pacow, you know, and I have to say, I really do appreciate what they tried to do here. I genuinely do think that was a great idea for a twist. I think, honestly, probably one of the better concepts of the series. I think that if they had just focused on that twist and executing that really well, I think this actually could have been one of the better Saw films. I really do. And because I just think that's such a great twist to just turn everything around from the previous movies when all you've built up to so far is the race against the clock. Like, they have to do it before the clock runs out. And then suddenly all he had to do was not do anything and just let the clock run out. Like, I think that could have been a really great twist. Like, ultimately, I think Saw 4, that was beautiful. I think Saw 4 ultimately is just a textbook example of a really great idea, but absolutely horrible execution. That's what I really think. And when I watched them all together, I watched them all back to back, like, that one was the one that made me most upset, because I really did just see a lot of potential in it. I think I see a lot of wasted potential in that film. I really do. Also, a really quick side note about this movie. I was in high school when Saw 4 came out, and there was this one German exchange student in one of my classes in high school, and I'll always remember he said that he thought that Saw 4 was the funniest movie he'd ever seen. Alright then, moving on. So Saw 5 is the one where you have the 5 people all put in the trap and they're all backstabbing each other to survive, but then lo and behold, it turned out the only way for them to survive was actually for them to all have worked together and they could have all survived. Now, I genuinely think this is the worst twist out of all the Saw films. Purely because I just thought it was so damn obvious from the very beginning when the puppet comes in and tells them that they're all selfish, but they have to act against their nature to survive. I think at that moment, anyone who's ever watched a movie ever could have probably figured out the twist. And if you didn't figure it out then you certainly would have in the second trap when they all had to get into like those little tubes to survive, and then like it turned out they could have, like, more than one of them could have fit in the tube. Like, duh, like, did you even look at them? They probably could have all fit in one of the tubes if they squeezed in a little bit. Really, in general, I found this movie more than any of the other ones to be, like, really insulting to my intelligence. Not just because of the stupid, obvious twist, but because of the whole thing where you have the agent, what the hell was that guy's name? Oh, obviously super memorable characters too, because I can't even remember their damn names. Strom, that guy, the Agent Strom. When he's figuring out that Hoffman is the one doing all this, basically he's finding all the evidence, and the problem I have is that every time he figures something out, he does this thing where he, like, says out loud exactly what he just figured out in this really creepy, not at all natural way of just, like, talking to himself. And it's so unnecessary because if you're watching the movie, you could easily understand what he just figured out without him saying it out loud. It's just so stupid. It's so unnecessary. It's so, like, patronizing. It's, okay. Done with that. I think that Hoffman is more than decent as a villain, although to be perfectly honest, it's a little hard for me to take him seriously with those, like, thick, luscious lips of his. I mean, just look at that picture of that guy. They're just like, oh, he has like the duck lips. It's distracting. In general, I just don't think this movie, I don't think Saw 5 was all that exciting. I have a couple other things written here, but I'm kind of bored talking about it. I'd rather just get into some of the ones I actually liked. 6, 7, and Jigsaw, I did like. I thought they were all exponentially better than 2 through 5, and I don't think any of them were better than 1, though. I still think that was the best one. But I think that part of how like 6, 7, and Jigsaw ended up being so much better was that they really did try to just like lean into the ridiculousness of it. Like they made a lot of the traps and the deaths really over the top and got to almost sort of like this Sci-Fi Channel original movie vibe, and I think it worked. Saw 6 had what I think was the best opening trap of the entire series, and most people seem to agree with that. It's the one where they, the girl and the guy have to cut off pieces of their bodies, and whoever gives up the most flesh survives. So the very overweight guy, and then and the woman. I gotta say, the performance of that woman, her name is Tanedra Howard. Her performance, absolutely fucking unbelievable. I mean, that scene alone is enough to make this one of my favorite Saw films. She is just so damn good. Holy crap. I would watch another whole movie just about her. She was so freaking good. If you don't remember, Saw 6 was the one about the health insurance company, that really topical one. This one also has what a lot of people consider to be the best trap, that like carousel of death with the 6 people on it and the shotgun. In other words, slightly more tolerable than a standard carousel, a standard merry-go-round. Ugh, hate those things. Now, I do think that is an absolutely amazing trap, but I don't think it's the best one. I still think the best trap is that original reverse bear trap. I think that thing is just fucking terrifying. I think that is the best trap of this series. It's just so invasive. I just think that's so good. But I also think that Saw 6 was the most I genuinely cared about the person in the main trap. Pretty much of all the Saw films, I really do think so. I was genuinely upset to see him die at the end. I really did end up feeling for him, and I think that's because, unlike, say, Jeff, he really did want to help everyone else in the traps. I really think he did. He really did want to save everyone. He tried his hardest to do that at great personal expense to himself. Yeah, like, while Jeff could have, like, very easily saved everyone, but just chose not to because he was a piece of shit, this dude, the hell is his name? William Easton, he really did try to save everyone he could, and then he still got killed in the end. Anyway, I think this was a really good one. I think this is one of the better Saw movies. Also, we saw more of Mark Hoffman and his luscious lips. I mean, those things take up half the screen whenever he's in a scene. Saw 7, I think, was the most over the top as far as just being really gratuitous and gory. That was also the one that was in 3D, which, I mean, you feel how you feel about that, and yeah. I think of all of them, 7 is probably the one that would most fit the definition of torture porn, as they like to call it, particularly with that opening trap. That was the one that was like the public trap for really no other reason other than, I guess, they wanted to display the bystander effect and what that is, just display that in motion. But it was also just gratuitous to the max, with like her titties popping out all over the place. Needless to say, that was not exactly my favorite trap. In general, 7 was the one about the guy who faked being in a jigsaw trap and wrote a book about it and became famous for it. Can't imagine how he thought that was going to work out well for him. But of course, Hoffman captures him and everyone who has been helping him and put them all in a trap. For the most part, I did enjoy the traps in 7. Particularly the one at the end where he had to do the exact trap that he claimed that he'd survived, and of course he couldn't do it. This was also the one that had Chester Bennington in it as that neo-Nazi skinhead, and that he had that cameo in it. And I thought the trap that he was in was absolutely fantastic. I thought he really sold that performance. I thought he did an amazing job in this movie. I think he did a really incredible job. I'll also say that of all the traps in this series, this was the one that excited me most to see the person fail, because, you know, neo-Nazi skinhead piece of shit. Can't tell me you didn't, crack a little bit of a smile seeing them all die. Yeah, kinda love that one. I also really liked, what else did I like? The callbacks to the previous films. Not just with Dr. Gordon, but the whole Jigsaw survivor support group. I liked that a lot. Because at the time, this was supposed to be the final film, so I really did appreciate them trying to bring it full circle. Plus, we got to see, what the hell was her name again? Damn it, I should really remember her name since I liked her so much. I had it written over here. Tanedra Howard, the girl in the opening trap from 6. Oh my god, we got to see her again, and again, she was just absolutely damn amazing. Such a great monologue in that scene that just shook me to the core. And I'd be lying if I said it didn't turn me on a little bit. But, like, seriously, she should just get cast in every horror movie from now until eternity. I want to see more of her. She is so damn good. As far as the cop storyline in 7, we get introduced to another fucking rando. He's basically like a carbon copy of Strom from before, except more annoying and an exponentially worse actor playing him. Although I have to say, watching it again, I'm not sure if he's just a bad actor or if the dialogue itself was just that bad. I'd be curious to see that actor in something else. Like, not curious enough that I'd actually go out of my way to do it, but if I did see him in it something else, I'd be curious. I don't know. All right, back to Hoffman and his lips. Seriously, Angelina Jolie, Kylie Jenner, Mark Hoffman. Those things are nuts. This is also the film where Hoffman finally dies, which makes sense since it was supposed to be the last one. Like I said, film really takes it full circle, back to the original, because they have Dr. Gordon, and they have him back in that same original shitty bathroom, which I think is really great because, you know, at the time it was supposed to be the final one. It turned out that Dr. Gordon had actually been helping Jigsaw since the very first film, and then he was tasked with protecting Jigsaw's wife after his death. Sure did a pretty shit-ass job of that because Hoffman killed her pretty damn easily, but I mean, where the hell were you, dude? You kind of just showed up after he'd already killed her, but whatever. It's not really worth getting into. Other thing I will say about Saw 7 is that it actually plays into one of my, like, personal irrational fears in one scene. As a person who has worked with cadavers before, and will again in the future, most likely, it is a consistent irrational fear of mine that I will at one point approach what I think is a dead body and then have it attack me. Not unlike what Hoffman did in the movie by hiding in a body bag and attacking the coroner. So, moving on to Jigsaw. I'll go ahead and just start with my biggest issue with Jigsaw, which was the revelation that there was yet another person who had been helping Jigsaw, but we had conveniently never seen or heard in any of the other films, and it was just so stupid. I mean, this guy had half the damn city for him, like city working for him at this point. He was the job creator that our country needs. If he hadn't died at the end of the third film, he'd probably have solved fucking unemployment in America by now. Okay. Another of my big issues was just how convoluted and incomprehensible the plot is. Like, I like to think I'm a fairly intelligent person. I graduated college, I passed all my pre-med classes, I passed the MCAT, I'm halfway through a master's degree, and yet this fucking movie, I've watched it several times, and at this point I've come to the conclusion that it's not that I can't understand certain things about it, it's that these things just genuinely make no fucking sense. And I'm not talking about, like, the major twist with the time jump, like the 10 years before thing. I think that was actually executed fairly well considering everything. I'm talking more about things where, like, it's just like, how could Jigsaw or this other dude have possibly known about this? Like, you essentially just have to assume that Jigsaw is some sort of supernatural being, like Bruce Willis in Unbreakable, where he can just know everyone's sins instantly. That's honestly the only explanation that makes any damn sense. Moving on to the things that I actually liked, I genuinely did like the way the time jump was executed. I thought that was done very well. I actually did not see that coming, although that might have just been because it was so close to the twist in Saw 2 that I didn't even really consider it as an option, but I thought it was done really well. I also thought they developed the characters of the people in the trap way better than they have in previous films. Really, like, the whole main trap was just kind of like a better version of Saw 5, like the whole main trap in Saw 5. A lot of this movie, really, it definitely was recycling old stuff from previous movies, but the thing is, it works because, for the most part, they do it better this time around. And they fix things that they didn't quite get right the first time that they tried to do them. And I think that's why I think this is one of the better Saw films. Yeah, I don't really have anything else for Jigsaw, so that's all the Saw films they've made so far, and how I feel about them. Apparently they're making another one now, I've heard a rumor, my light's being weird, sorry, I heard a rumor it's coming out later this year, but I don't know for sure. I know Tobin Bell at one point said that he was interested in doing something that would maybe talk into the origins of Billy, the creepy little doll. I don't know how much they could really do with that, but it could be interesting, could be something different. In general, I think Saw is a very solid horror franchise. I mean, sure, there are some stinkers in there, but it's hard not to when you have a franchise that's gone on this long and has that many movies in it. I mean, there are 8 movies in it. That's a lot. One of the things I really admire about the Saw movies as a franchise is that they genuinely make the effort to make it cohesive. They plant things in earlier films that seem just inconsequential and then do a call back to them in later films. Of course, one of the downsides to this is that it makes it more difficult to watch them as like standalone movies, but I still think it deserves some recognition. A lot of franchises, particularly horror franchises, that have gone on as long and have that many movies, they will at least once try to pretend that like a certain movie or that a certain plot point just never happened. Like the reboot, not even reboot, the new Halloween movie, they basically just pretended everything except for the original never happened and just like went on from the plot point from that. So after 8 films, Saw hasn't done anything like that. They have tried to tie in absolutely everything that's happened. And I think that that's something that's really admirable. And I'm sure there's some inconsistencies, some plot holes, some things that just don't make any fucking sense, but that comes with the territory of the choice that they've made, and it's a really bold choice to make every film cohesive like that. The other reason I do really appreciate this franchise is I think it's really admirable how in 8 movies they have really kept jump scares to a bare minimum. In a lot of horror movies, they're just so reliant on jump scares. Sometimes that's all there is. That's all there is to a horror movie is just jump scares. And I think it is so impressive that Saw, for the most part, has really managed to stay above that. And really because they don't need it. The terror of Saw is psychological terror, and I think that's a big part of why I like the Saw films so much. It's the kind of horror that doesn't need jump scares, and which is the kind of horror that I tend to really be a fan of. It doesn't need to startle you to be scary, basically. It's a lasting terror. That's the kind of horror that I like. That's it. That's really how I felt after watching all of them back to back in one day. It was a really wonderful day. I enjoyed it very much. I highly suggest marathoning these movies all together like that if you haven't already done so. I'd love to hear some other people's opinions. Please leave them if you have some. Go leave them below if you're inclined. Also, if you know of anyone else who has done a review of all 8 Saw movies like this, please link that down below. I would love to see that and compare my thoughts to theirs. That's really all. This ended up being a hell of a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. I really thought I would just kind of do a quick touch on each of these points I had on each movie, but I guess I had more to say than I originally thought. So if this goes over well, then I'd love to talk about movies some more, particularly horror movies. Maybe I'll make like a video of just all my favorite horror movies or all my favorite horror franchises, something like that, if that's something that you would like to see. Happy post-Valentine's Day, everyone, and I hope you all have a great day.